How do the best leaders in the world shape culture? This is the Leaders of Transformation podcast. And on this show, we interview difference makers and world changers who are disrupting for good. I'm your host, Nicole Jansen, and our guest today is Greg Cagle. For over 3 decades, Greg has been building and leading successful companies in 5 different industries. He is passionate about authenticity and transformative workplace culture. Some say he's an acquired taste, perhaps maybe even weird. However, if you are looking to go beyond normal and into the realm of greatness, he's your guy. So today we're going to talk about his new book, The 4 Dimensions of Culture, which, by the way, is an excellent book. And if you're a leader, you want to get a copy of this, I've already recommended to a number of people. And we're going to talk about why, if culture is not your primary focus as a leader, you may just be missing the boat. So this is going to be very valuable to you if you are an aspiring entrepreneur as well as a global business leader. So make sure you tune in and listen all the way to the end. So let's bring our guest on. Greg, welcome to the Leaders of Transformation. We're glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this for a while. So thanks.
Well, and I so appreciate your book. And I told you this when we chatted, is that I was so impressed. I get a lot of copies of books from authors, and this isn't just to say that everybody else needs to send me a personalized copy, but I was so impressed that this was not just another copy that you sent in the mail, but you actually personalized it to me, and thank you for that. You took the time, and that really spoke to me right off the bat before I even read your book. It spoke to me about the quality that you're committed to. And so thank you for that. And hey, by the way, we also want to do a shout out to Lisa Maskey, who introduced us.
Yep.
And so Lisa, if you're listening out there, thank you so much. I always like to thank those that support this show. And we're so blessed with a number of PR agents and podcast booking agents that send us amazing guests. And so Lisa, thank you so much for that. Well, let's dive in. I kind of alluded to the fact that people, and it was in your bio that I read, is that people think you're a little weird, or you look at things a little differently. Why do they say that?
Yeah, well, so this is a journey that started for me a number of years back, and it started with my middle son, who informed me one day when I just gotten home from a business trip that he just didn't fit in. And he said, we were in Costa Rica at the time, and so there was that. We're not originally from Costa Rica, so he didn't fit in there. And but he's very unique young man, and I'll never forget this. He said to me, he said, Dad, I just don't fit in. People just keep telling me I'm weird. And then he said something that just really kind of pierced my heart. He said, I hate myself for being weird. And that struck an emotional chord with me. And I put my arm around him and I said, here's what we're going to do. I said, you and I we're going to take a journey. We're going to kind of unpack this whole weird thing. And we're going to determine what it is that weird is, and why it's important, and why you should celebrate it. And so he and I took this journey, and it actually ended up in me writing a book called Be Weird. And here's an interesting tidbit that he and I found as we began to research and talk about it. The word weird, ironically enough, came from the Old English language. And the definition of weird, if it was used, meant that you had the power to control destiny. And so we kind of hung our hat on that. And we said, look, we're going to go out there and we're going to be weird. We're going to celebrate that. We're going to be authentic to that. And we're basically going to operate from this standpoint of nothing extraordinary ever came from normal. And so we're going to express our weirdness. And so it just stuck. And so as I began to do more and more business with people and encourage authenticity and weirdness, and then weirdness in the workplace and authenticity in the workplace, it just kind of stuck. And so everybody started kind of calling me the weird one.
Well, I love that. And I know that we have many of our listeners who are the weird ones, who people say, you're not normal. And, it's like when people say that to me, you're not normal. It's like, thank you. I don't want to be normal. And the normal ones are not the ones. I was thinking actually of Stephen Jobs, how he has that quote, like, here's the crazy ones. Yeah. And I love that. I love that because it's the crazy ones who are crazy enough to believe that they can change the world that do. So thank you for that. Now, speaking of which, and I was going to talk a little about this a little bit later on, but you mentioned it, Costa Rica. You moved your family to Costa Rica for
I
3 years. Why?
did. Yeah. So this is one of those defining moments in your lifetime that really kind of puts its imprint on you. This was coming out of the financial collapse back in 2008. As you might remember, the cause of that was really the real estate industry collapsed, and then as a result, the banking industry and the monetary system kind of broke down. I was neck deep in real estate at the time. I had a real estate company. We had over 70 some odd employees, a very significant real estate holding of different real estate projects in various forms of development and execution. Anyway, long story short, that was a very, very tough time for me. And when I worked my way through it and got on the other side of it, I made this comment to my wife. I said, we ought to just get away and let's get some different scenery. And we had visited Costa Rica a couple of times. Both of us really, really loved it. And I said, you know what? Let's just move to Costa Rica. And I was about half kidding. And she just quickly said, yep, I think that's a good idea. And if you're waiting on me, you're backing up. So next thing I know, there was a for sale sign in the yard, and we were moving to Costa Rica. And it was great. I mean, we spent 3 years there. I took the first year and just kind of regrouped, just kind of reinvented, really figured out, what I'd been through and what was the value of it. What did I learn from it? What could I do with that moving forward? And then began to work from Costa Rica. And it was a good experience. We enjoyed it, and almost didn't come back. But someone that really in our family that really, really mattered to me got ill, and I felt like we wanted to be here, so we came back, and I'm glad we did. But that was it. Just simply go, change the scenery, look at the world from a different angle, and be around, ironically enough, a different culture. See what that feels like.
Well, I think there's a great lesson in here from a leader standpoint because we think of leadership in the context of the workplace, but it's also being a leader in your household. And yes, you did it in part for you, but what a gift you gave to your kids to get that change of scenery. And how often do leaders need to do that with their teams, with their families? And even if that means taking an offsite, going and getting a change of scenery, interrupting the regular pattern. And we're going to talk about these 4 dimensions of culture and where that even fits in, because it does fit into one of your dimensions there. But this idea of being that leader that you need to be. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, and sometimes it means you're doing the crazy thing, the weird thing that other people wouldn't agree with, but knowing that that's the right thing to do. And you also mentioned about your wife, and I think that's really important. For not everybody has that, but it is absolutely a blessing to have a spouse that supports them. And I see that so much in my clients, that having that spouse that is supportive, that says, yeah, I'm with you. Now that takes both sides, and we can go, that's a whole podcast in itself, of how to create a relationship where there is that trust and all of that, because does take two. But let's talk about great leadership and what are the ingredients of great leadership?
Yeah. So there's so many, and this is an interesting topic for me because I've been traveling in the leadership circles for a while, and everybody has an opinion on leadership, and everyone will tell you, okay, this is what great leaders are, and this. And look, I think leadership boils down to a couple of things, very simple. Number one, I think it really starts with authenticity. Nicole, I know you're a leader, and you're going to lead in a way that is authentic to you. And you're going to lead in a way that makes you the most effective you can be. And if you're really, really a good leader, you're going to lead me. If I work with you, you're going to lead me in a way that allows me to be authentic and in the way I need to be led. So authenticity is extremely important. And then the best leaders that I've ever worked for, I would describe them as genuinely curious. And I challenge leaders to this all the time. And I say, listen, C.S. Lewis has a definition of humility, and I think humility is important in leadership. here's what he says, and I believe I quoted this in the book. He said, leadership is not thinking less of yourself, meaning you should be confident. You should be bold in who you are. You should be proud of your weirdness and what you bring to people's table. And you need to live that out. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not arrogant. That's not overly confident. That's just being who you are and adding the value to the world that you were meant to add. But then he goes on to say, it's just thinking of yourself less. So, the best leaders that I know, they're authentic in who they are. They're confident, they're bold, they're aggressive. They know where they add the value, and that's where they bring their A game. But they do it in a way that benefits those around them, and they're genuinely curious to understand, what do you think? What do you see? You have a different perspective on this, and I'm really wanting to know. In fact, I challenge leaders. I do, as you know, a fair amount of executive coaching, not as much as I used to, but I want to do more. But I'm speaking, it kind of gets in the way. But I challenge leaders all the time. I say, look, you can be one of two kinds of leaders. You can be that leader that walks in the room, that is confident, provides direction, gives us the vision, offers up solutions to the problems, helps us discern who's responsible for what. And we experience that leader. And then as they walk out the door, we look and we go, wow, that's the smartest person in the room right there. And there's a confidence that goes with that, and people draw confidence from that. But there's another leader, and this is what I challenge people to think about, is the leader that understands the brilliance lies in the collective, and that a leader's responsibility is to extract the brilliance of those they've been entrusted to lead. And this leader walks into that same room and begins to ask questions, and genuinely curious about hearing what people have to say, what does their experience tell them, and what perspective is it that they see things from. And when we experience that leader, we don't say, there goes the smartest person in the room. We say, gosh, I feel so much smarter because that leader was in this room. And when people feel smarter and they feel valued and they feel like what they bring to the table contributes to something bigger than themselves, they're going to do extraordinary things. They're going to do extraordinary things as an individual, and they're going to do extraordinary things collectively with the people on their team. So those are just kind of some of the core things that I think about with leadership. And if you start there, everything else becomes much easier.
Yeah, and I think it's important as we talk about culture. A lot of times people will focus on culture, leaders will focus on culture, and they kind of suggest, and I've had leaders say, you know what, you need to come in and help me, and fix my people. It's like,
Yeah.
really? That's interesting. Let's talk about that. Because leadership success rises and falls on leadership, and the bottleneck is always at the top. And so, to your point, I love what you said there about not being the smartest person in the room, because I was thinking that quote. So great minds think alike. I was thinking that quote when you were talking. And how do you unlock the greatness in your people? I mean, you can't do that if you're the one who thinks that they need to have all the answers. I think that's an old style of leadership that really doesn't work. It never really worked. It worked to an extent, maybe to get a certain outcome, but not truly the best outcome that was possible. And so this idea of bringing out that greatness, I think, is really important. Like, I believe that great leaders build leaders rather than followers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you said it a couple of times right there. You talked about, bringing out the brilliance in others. This is why I hate this word that's out in business right now. You hear leaders say this all the time. Oh, great leaders empower their people. And I understand why they say that, and I understand the meaning behind that. But truthfully, there's a mindset there. And it basically says, you need me to give you power to perform. The reality is, Nicole, and you and I both know this because we kind of know the creator, but you are a powerful human being. And the first step that a leader, if you want to be genuinely curious, you can't be genuinely curious of what someone thinks if you think all their power comes from you giving them authority, giving them the right to exercise power, and so on and so forth. You got to look at them and go, there's power in that individual. That individual
Yes.
brings something very
Yes.
unique for a season and a reason and for a purpose to my door. And if I can get inside of that, I'm going to unleash something extremely powerful. And so it's a mindset. I know you believe this too, because I heard you say this on one of your podcasts. Behaviors follow mindsets, and outcomes are a result of behaviors. And so leadership mindset for me starts, and this is the very foundational thing to building a good culture, is look at your people and understand they're powerful human beings. They have a tremendous amount to contribute. They desire to be part of something bigger than themselves and to have a tribal belonging to something that is purposeful and then in the pursuit of that purpose. And you need to treat them that way. You need to interact with them. I define culture as the way you think, act, and interact. If I think you're powerful, I will act in a way that allows you to exercise that power, and I will interact with you in a genuinely curious way that wants to know more about the power you bring to my organization. And so as the leader thinks, every leader casts a shadow over culture. And so as the leader thinks, acts, and interacts, that begins to set the tone for culture. That's way more than you asked for.
That is awesome. And I love what because it's the foundation, like you said. I mean, we can talk about the 4 dimensions of culture, but if you're not coming at it from that perspective, then you're off center, and so understanding that people are already bringing that. And as obvious as that sounds, how many leaders and managers have the assumption that their people don't want to do that don't want to be great, that don't want to be the work, and we've got to convince them, we've got to push them, we've got to force them, coerce them, whatever, to get the best out of them, when in fact we're actually, it's becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, because that's what we're going to end up getting, because that's the way, when we think that way, we're going to act and we're going to interact according to that. So that is so good. Let's talk about your book. So the 4 dimensions of culture and the leaders who shape them. I love, as I said, I love your book. I love the way that you have so many practical examples. I love the way you started off the book. I mean, literally, I started reading it. I said, my husband was here in the room, and I was like, see, now I already know this is going to be a great book, just by the way he started with the story, and it was really excellent. But so I'm creating some curiosity for our listeners. Go get a copy of his book.
Yeah.
It's really worth it. So, but you talk about these 4 dimensions. Let's unpack the 4 dimensions, and then we can talk about how they work together.
Yeah. Well, it might be interesting to cover real quickly before we speak about the 4 dimensions of culture. Give a little bit of context or backdrop behind that in understanding. This is what my experience in the business world has taught me over the years. If you want a business that is going to be successful over a sustained period of time with longevity, and you're going to be performing your business is going to be performing at its peak or close to its peak for long periods of time, there's 3 things that every business has to deliver on, 3 primary business functions that are necessary to have that longevity. And one is executing strategy. Most leaders understand that. Most people in an organization understand that it requires a focus and a commitment to executing on our strategy. And the second business function is navigating crisis. And this is where I think the conversation begins to get intriguing, because people will say, oh, yeah, you need to navigate crisis. And then you'll even have leaders go as far as to say, we want to plan for that crisis and plan for that adversity. And here's what I would suggest. The type of crisis and adversity that will derail an organization and send it off into irrelevance or into catastrophe almost always is something that comes from a place you couldn't have planned for and hits you in the middle of the night when you didn't see it coming. And we have no better example of that than the recent pandemic. Show me one business leader that said they planned for that. Tell me one business leader that said, I knew that was coming. That's not true. But you can't plan for it. But here's the thing: you can be prepared. And the
Yes.
businesses that stand on the other side of crisis and are still standing are the ones that were prepared. Well, what is that preparation? It's culture. And then the third business function is capturing opportunity. And that's the very thing, when you capture that, it's usually the thing that catapults you to the next level, creates that competitive gap. And most of that opportunity, again, does not operate on the same calendar or strategy and comes and presents itself out of nowhere when you least expected it. Can't plan for it. You can be prepared. You can be agile enough to capture that opportunity and move to the next level. So I said all that to say this. That's why culture is so important. Now, to be able to deliver on those three business functions consistently, you have to have a culture that has all the elements necessary to do that and is balanced and healthy. And that's where the four dimensions of culture come in. So should I take a break and have you respond to that, or do you want me to keep moving forward with the four dimensions?
Well, you know what? I will just say this is that I love the way you set that up. And a lot of times when I hear people talk about culture, they talk about being kind to people. They talk about, humanity in the workplace. And I love the way that you're speaking to it, that it addresses crisis, it addresses strategy, and it addresses opportunity. So this is very tactical. That's why I wanted you to come on and talk about this, because it's more than humanity in the workplace. It's maybe unpacking what that actually looks like, practically speaking, so that leaders who are saying, well, that's all nice, be kind to your people and create wellness programs or whatever the case is, they're going, that's nice, but I have a business to run too. And I've got this and I've got that and I have all these things going on. And how do I deal with all of that? And where does culture fit into that? And so that's why I wanted you to talk about that, because you unpack it from a way that, like, I looked at it in these four dimensions. That's what I do. I don't just take somebody's word for it. I filter it through my own experience and perspective and everything. As I did, I was kind of looking at it from different angles, and I was like, yeah, this nails it. This really nails it. So let's talk about the four dimensions.
Yep. So the four dimensions, and I'll label them real quick, and then I'll go back and retrace my steps and kind of break each one down just a little bit. So the four dimensions are complacency, a complacent dimension, the compliant dimension, the committed dimension, and the courageous dimension. And those are named appropriately for various reasons. We'll talk about the complacency first. It is a dimension of every organization's culture. It is the one dimension that is negative, and it's the one dimension that we want to avoid, eradicate if we can, but certainly keep to a minimum. And what's interesting here is, and when I talk to leaders about this, they shake their head and go, "Oh yeah," because they inherently knew this, but I just verbalize it in a way that resonates with them. And I say, if you think about complacency, you can't have complacency in an organization until you have success first, because complacency by its very nature is complacent about something. And in the case of business, it's success. For organizations, they work hard, they have a plan, they execute on that plan. Everyone's committed and unified to delivering on that. And the next thing you know, they find themselves on the success mountain. And what's the first thing that, what's the natural thing to do from there? Replicate that success, scale it, systematize it, process it, proceduralize it. And so the process begins, which is not a bad thing, Nicole. It's not bad at all until it becomes the only thing. And so what we're really doing there is we are committing to the status quo. Here's how we got here. Let's commit to this and let's replicate it in every aspect that we can. And that brings us to the next dimension, which is the compliant dimension, which is all about order and structure. And this is where your processes, your procedures, your rules, your efficiencies, all of that exist in this compliant dimension. The reason is because we're asking people to comply with our processes, our systems, and our rules. And again, order and structure in a business is an excellent thing. But I'll stop here and just ask you a quick question. and I know you know the answer, but what happens when we overly focus on compliance matters? So we have all these procedures and all these processes and all these rules, and we're trying to account for every potential thing that could come up in our day-to-day business and either eradicate mistakes or replicate successful efficiencies. What do you think happens in an organization when we get caught up in that and we overexpand that dimension of our culture?
Well, I think ultimately you go to complacency and you stifle creativity. And you mentioned the word mistakes, as people become afraid of making mistakes. I was just talking to somebody the other day, a client, and I said there's a big difference between avoiding mistakes and being committed to 100% accuracy. And
Ooh.
it's like, so you're moving them into that fear, and they're coming from a place of fear and rigidity, where it's like, this is the system and we can't go outside the system. And that's like the pride before the fall.
You nailed it right there. An overabundance of compliance is it's uninspiring, number one, but what it does is it creates people to become in a robotic state. And the complacency here is complacency sounds and looks different depending on where what the source is. So when the source of complacency is over compliance, it sounds like this. Well, Nicole, tell me what to do and I'll do it. What does the manual say? Do we have a predetermined rule or process for this? Just follow that. That's what we're here to do. Because a lot of people think of complacency as a bunch of people sitting around doing nothing. No, they're doing plenty. It's just not as productive as it could be. And so what happens is I say, well, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And that drives the organization into complacency.
So what I hear in that is that you actually get their head, but you're not getting their heart.
Oh, absolutely. The heart. You said it eliminates creativity. Think about this: if everything is meant to fit within a system and a process, there is no room for creativity. Whether you are willing to fail or not, or whether you're willing to make a mistake or not, there's no room for it. And so, and here's what we know: all creativity comes from the heart. An organization creates an environment, and let's say you want to have a business that puts an enormous pressure on people to perform. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with pressure, and I'll explain that in just a second. But there's this enormous pressure to perform, but no stress. Now, think about that for a second. How do you achieve that? You remove fear. And cultures either remove fear and replace it with confidence and basically love. And that's where the stress goes. It's like, I remember I played sports when I was in high school. And I can remember on Friday night, you're looking across the field on a football field, and it's your crosstown rival. And there's this enormous pressure to perform, and everybody feels it. But if we've done it right and the coach has prepared us properly, there's no stress. It's like, give me the ball. I'm ready. Let's go. And so it's the same thing here. When you create an environment with such tight guardrails of operation, the creativity associated with, to your point, the heart completely evaporates. It's gone.
Yeah.
And so efficiency replaces innovation and creativity. And that's why so many startups in the beginning are so crazy creative, because they don't have any systems or processes. They haven't had any success yet. There's nothing to replicate. We're chasing the dream. And then once we capture the dream, then we begin to systematize that. So anyway, I'm getting a little rambling here.
Not at all. No, it's good.
Yeah. So those are two: complacency and compliance, or compliant. And then the third one, this one, all leaders understand this one. This is the committed dimension. This is about performance and achievement. And this is where all of our goals reside. And we are in the pursuit of a higher performance metric. And this is where leaders have to motivate and challenge people to want to perform at a higher level. And if you do it right, people are consistently looking to go beyond their best past performance. and they're wanting to expand their capacity and capability. And this is this is obviously a very important dimension of the culture. And I don't need to spend a lot of time on it because this is one area most leaders get. I do think many times they lead it incorrectly, but that's another podcast episode. And I'll ask the same question here. So what happens in an organization where we overly focus on goals, we overly focus on winning every single time, and we hit the goal, we raise the goal, we hit the goal, we raise the goal, we ask for more. What does that usually create in an organization?
Burnout.
Burnout, right, which leads people to complacency.
Yes.
So in the overabundance of compliance, complacency sounded like, well, just tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Yeah. Because I don't want to have to put the energy in to think about it. I just want to get it done and survive.
Well, yeah. And even if I do put any energy into it, I'm probably going to get my wrist slapped because I stepped outside of something that was predetermined.
Right.
And then the committed dimension, when it's overblown, you're right, it's burnout. And complacency doesn't sound like it does in the compliant dimension. It sounds like, what's the use? I can't ever satisfy this organization. I'm done. I'm finished. Yeah. Why bother? And I'm telling you, Nicole, I see this happen in so many organizations. And what really bothers me the most is this is the one dimension where I think well-intentioned leaders, they're good leaders, they have good hearts, they don't want to, but they just don't understand that there's more to winning than winning.
Yes.
And they don't celebrate, contribution. They don't celebrate a loss that has all other elements that we want. If I set you a goal and you don't achieve that goal, but as I watched you pursue that goal, you were committed, your work ethic was beyond reproach, you were a team player, you added value to those around you. There's an opportunity for me to celebrate that with you. There's an opportunity for me to say, you know what, Nicole, I know you didn't get the outcome you wanted, but man, let me tell you what I just saw, and let me tell you why you're a valuable tribe member here. And leaders forget that.
Yeah.
So that's the committed dimension.
Yeah, and that one it's very interesting because working with a lot of entrepreneurs, this is not just for your team, this is for you. So if you keep driving yourself and you don't, and I've been guilty of this, okay? So I was always good at celebrating other people's wins, not my own. And so somebody called me on it and said, hey, you didn't celebrate your win. And I went, oh my goodness, I didn't. And it was something really, really important. And if you don't do that, if you don't acknowledge the success along the way, you don't acknowledge the growth along the way and the effort, then you're going to burn yourself out because you're going to be like, what's the use? And how many people do we know that have said even to themselves, what's the use? Why bother? Whether it's in relationships, whether it's in business, whether it's with their health, why bother? Why? Because it's like we put it all out there and we're waiting for something, this big thing to happen, and we can only celebrate when we get to that big thing, but there's so much along the way. So anyway, I just wanted to put that in there.
Well, no, I love that. In fact, if you don't mind, let me flip this over and let me be the interviewer for a second, because I'd love your opinion on this. My experience has taught me over the years that many leaders in organizations get to a leadership position because they were a performer.
Yes.
And I mean, in fact, I'm not saying that that's the only way you get to leadership, but what I would say is without performance, you rarely get to a leadership position.
Yes.
So most of them are top performers. You're one of them. Now, here's the question that I have for you. Why is it that some of the most top performing people who become leaders, why are they hardest? Why do they never celebrate themselves? Why are they never happy with their achievements? And I mean, I think that's a question we have to ask.
Yes. Great question. That's a whole podcast in itself. That's, I think, about not being enough. And a lot of times, depending on how we grew up, we may have been, maybe we grew up in a household, which is a high performing household. I've seen this where dad or mom was really a high performer. And it's like, I need to live up to their expectations in order to get love, to be accepted, to be whatever. And a lot of high performance actually are outrunning that fear that they're not enough. And it's like, again, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm going to try to outrun this thing, but at some point I can't outrun it. And then I'm faced with it. This happened to me. I was faced with this and I'm like, oh crap, maybe I'm not enough. Maybe maybe I'm all of this and I'm all of this. And, and it's like, yes, I'm all of those things. And can I accept myself? And I think that's where worthiness comes in, knowing yourself, knowing what you're good at. We were talking about that earlier, is like knowing what you're good at or great at, and also knowing what you're not great at, knowing that you're all of your successes and you're also all of your failures, quote unquote failures. And so anyway, that's a whole, as I said, that's a whole subject in itself, but it's that not enoughness. It's never enough. It comes from a place of fear. It's never enough. We never arrive. We're constantly pushing that goalpost out, hoping that at some point when we reach there, we're going to feel fulfilled. And we're never going to feel fulfilled if we don't get it. If we don't get that we're fulfilled in the way.
Yeah, Nicole, I think that's that you nailed it right there, because I think, and you're right, this is a podcast for another day, but I think it bears thinking about, because if you're leading others in an organization, you're trying to build a healthy performance culture, you need to understand this. And I think you're right. Somewhere along the way, we were brought up in a way that we are valued when we perform.
Yes.
Here's the part that no one told us. When you actually achieve it, when you hit the success, it lets you down.
Yes.
You celebrate it for a moment. Yeah, it kind of felt good, but you look around and go, is this all there is? And if that's you, then you say, well, then there must be more. So you begin to go to the next one and to the next one, when the reality is what you're really looking for is significance.
Yes.
And I wanted to bring this full circle, because the best leaders I know that I've worked with, I'm coaching a guy right now that is just brilliant at this. And what he does is he attaches significance to the success. He attaches purpose to the success. And so when you get there, it's almost like you're not celebrating the goal itself. You're celebrating, you look around with your tribe members and it sounds like this. Can you believe we did this? This was purposeful. This meant something. We added value somewhere. This did something significant.
Yes.
And so I don't want to give away too much, because then maybe nobody's going to buy the book. But I think that's a big part of leading that dimension well, is understanding you can't continue to raise goals and raise performance standards with people unless there is some emotional attachment to it. And that comes with significance. If I can say this, achievement is performance driven. Commitment and sustainability is emotionally driven. And if you don't have an emotional element tied to your committed dimension, people are going to burn out. Either that, or you just can't raise the bar anymore. And not raising the bar gets you left behind. So it's not even a matter of you can't keep raising the goals. You can do that. You just got to understand how to do it in a way that creates the emotional attachment to what it is we're trying to achieve. Because success in of itself will always disappoint. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah.
I am absolutely convinced of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not where we're supposed to get our value from.
No.
So, yeah, that's good. Yeah. What's the last one?
The last one is courageous. And we call this the courageous dimension because this is the dimension of your culture where all your innovation, your creativity, and your change lives. And we all know what happens to an organization that doesn't innovate. We understand what happens to organizations that don't find creative ways of doing things. And ultimately, if you're not changing, you're becoming irrelevant. So I had a general in the Army tell me one time, he said, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less, which is true. And so this is an exciting dimension because this is where the activity of brainstorming and doing something out of the box and extraordinary happens. But it is amazingly, it is one of the areas where I think so many businesses fall short. They look at incremental improvement as innovation. It's not. It's incremental improvement. And you've read the books, you know, there's several stories in there about leaders who, couldn't recognize innovative opportunities when they presented themselves. And here's the pitfall for this one. This is why many, many leaders miss it. So if I said to you, Nicole, look, so let's say I'm coaching you and you're a business leader. And so I say to you, listen, the first thing I want to help you with as a leader is we've got to set up this system for vetting new ideas and innovation. So what I want us to do is I want us to create this evaluation process within our organization that vets these things out very, very detailed. And, we want a lot of eyes on these, right? And so what happened, and I get leaders shaking their head. Yeah, that's what I want. That's what I want. I want to make sure. Well, listen, let me tell you the problem with that. Innovation always sounds stupid at the time. Innovation flies in the face of traditional wisdom and not wisdom, traditional knowledge and experience. If you look at everything through the lens of knowledge and experience, most innovative ideas will never give birth. And the reason is because they sound really stupid. And I use the example in the book of Western Union when they were offered the patents of Alexander Graham Bell, and the CEO of the company said, what would we do with an electronic toy? And the reason is he evaluated the telephone at the time based off what he knew about long distance communication and compared it to telegraphs. And if you did that, the telephone didn't make sense at the time. However, if you have the courage, thus the name courageous, to abandon what you know in search of what you need to know, to step outside of the comfort of your experience and your knowledge. And by the way, I'm not saying that experience and knowledge isn't a good thing, but if it's the only thing, we're in trouble. And so, it takes a lot of courage, to step outside of that and call into question everything you thought you knew. Yeah. It takes courage to question your success while you're at the top of the mountain. But if you don't do it, you won't stay at the top of the mountain very long.
Well, when you were talking about complacency, tying it to this, is that our brains, I had somebody else on the show, I forget who it was talking about our brains being energy hogs, meaning that it wants to save and conserve energy. And so if we're saving, conserving energy, and we're just like, great, we know how this is done, we're just going to keep doing it. And to your point, I was imagining you coming in and, this box that you basically put all these ideas through. And it's like none of them are going to fit in that box. None of them are going to make sense in that process because you're literally siphoning the creativity, you're siphoning the inspiration literally out of it. And that it's just, there's just this thing, and then it's reduced to logic, and logic won't do it. So, but this idea of engaging your brain, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, not being the smartest person in the room, being a leader that invites people, already knowing that people have the genius, they have the brilliance, they have the creativity already, they have the power already to do amazing things. And it's inviting that, engaging them into, the conversation and engaging that. It's funny because we talk about employee engagement and, customer engagement and all this kind of thing, but a lot of it is actually coming from the wrong perspective. It's off center again. It's we want to get them engaged in our idea. Well, what about if they actually brought their idea to the table and actually, like you said, hey, I want your opinion. What do you think about this? And then it's like, well, now that you mention it, well, actually, I think we could do it this way. And that sounds crazy, and then it's like, but let's explore that. What if? And that's why even this podcast, I think I was sharing with you, I want this podcast, each episode to be something that pushes the boundaries on what people already know to be true, and kind of go into that either finer distinctions or go into that realm of innovation possibility, because maybe somebody listens to this and just by expanding their mind about this, they go, oh, I never thought of that. It exercises their brain to think of something else transformative in a different way, because we're exercising our muscles right now.
I made a note when you said this. I've never heard the brain as an energy hog, but I totally agree with that statement. And you said that it's constantly wanting to save and conserve energy. And I would add to that and say, and when it expends energy, it wants to expend it very, very efficiently. Yes. And so the natural tendency is to say, what do we know about this? How does this stack up with what we know? Can this pass, the mustard test, and quickly move on whether it's a good idea or not a good idea? And you also brought this up, asking the question, what do you think about this? I mean, I would even challenge that, as a matter of fact, because here's the mistake I've made so many times in my career. And I just want to go back and I want to find the people that I used to lead in my companies and say, I'm sorry, I was an idiot. But you walk into a meeting that's supposed to be a brainstorming meeting. You walk into a meeting that's supposed to be, okay, this is our innovation time. And as a leader, you want to add value to that. You want to stimulate the conversation. So what do? You walk in and the first thing you do is you throw all these ideas out. And then you throw out the ideas about how you think this might come to reality and who it may serve and how it may give us a competitive edge, and on and on and on. And then you say, so what do you guys think about this? Now, what's wrong with that process? You just made them think about, right up front. Yeah. Yeah, you made them think about this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I tell leaders all the time, they say, well, if you could pick one leadership quality that might be the game changer, if you could only choose one, I say, be the best question asker in the room. And you don't walk in the room with anything other than, all right, here's the deal, guys. What do you see?
Yeah.
What do you know? What's nagging at you right now? Now, I haven't said anything. I haven't said, here's my idea. I haven't even identified a problem yet. What I did is I forced them immediately to think with no guardrails, zero. In fact, if I've really done my job, they're thinking, what is he after? Exactly what is he talking about? Good. What I want to know is what's nagging at you? What do you see? What bothers you the most?
That's so good.
And just begin that conversation and create this space that says, hey, just because I walked into the room with the title and authority, forget that. Challenge everything that I say, call everything I do into question. If you don't do that, you're not serving this organization or your leader well. And leaders need to project that. I was doing a study the other day, and it was talking about the Hebrew language. So you could probably figure out what I was studying at the time. And here's an interesting note, and I think this applies in the courageous dimension in creating the right culture. The word "help me" in the original Hebrew language translates to English very specifically as beneficial adversary. Now think about that for a moment. Wouldn't it be really cool if every leader walked into every situation and said, listen, I may be your boss, but I need you to be my beneficial adversary. I need you to call into question what I'm saying. I need you to cut me off when I'm wrong. And I need you to debate me when I don't see what you see, because you're on the front line. You're touching it. You're seeing it. As you can see, I'm passionate about this, and I apologize.
No, I think that's really fascinating. Beneficial adversary. And what I was thinking about is, in order to do that, in order to have, and I think that's a really important piece of leaders and great leadership, is to be so secure in yourself. Coming back to the idea of enoughness, is to be so secure in yourself that you can be second guessed. You can have somebody say, I don't agree with you. And I think that's the problem with a lot of leaders. I've been there too. I didn't want feedback. We just recently had somebody on our show that talked about called the feedback fix. And, he talked about this idea of how to give feedback. And there's also giving feedback, there's also receiving feedback and being comfortable receiving feedback. And as leaders, usually we're in the mode of how do I give good feedback so that my people can grow? And what you're talking about is actually the flip side and saying, I want the feedback, but I need to be secure enough in myself that I would be comfortable getting that feedback, even if it goes directly against what I would think was the right way to do it or what I have been doing, and saying, hey, I think the way that you've been, or that we've been doing this is completely wrong and we need to look at another way. That takes a secure person.
Well, can I suggest this to you and get your thought on it? I agree with you. Many leaders fall short in this area because they're not secure enough in who they are to be called into question. I agree with that. But let me offer up this. I don't know you real well, Nicole, but I am pretty confident that you are secure in who you are, because I think you know who you are. I think you know where you came from, and you understand your purpose on this planet. Is it possible, though, even as secure as you are, is it possible you could miss this because of your desire? Let's go back to the fact that many, I'm not going to say most, many leaders get to a leadership position because they've performed, they've contributed, their actions and their results are measurable. Okay.
Yes.
Now, so you carry that into your leadership. Now, I'm going to go back to just make sure the listeners understand what I'm saying here. So we're going to take Nicole, very, very secure in who she is, has zero problem of being called into question. In fact, enjoys good debate, so on and so forth. You may still fall short in the creative process. Here's why. Because the natural tendency for you as a performer and a contributor and someone who measures your own contribution and your own effort, you want to jump in there and you want to be part of this process, and you want to create alongside these people, and you want to prove that you have value. And you're not, by the way, you're not trying to prove it to them, you're trying to prove it to yourself. Let's just get that straight, right?
Yes.
It's such a temptation.
Yes.
It takes so much discipline to hold on to all of your ideas and your thoughts and just I call it the QBQ approach to leadership. The question behind the question, the question behind the question, and doing it, by the way, not trying to lead someone to the conclusion you've already come to, but doing it with genuine curiosity. What is really inside Nicole's head? What does she mean by that? Where's the value in that? I need to ask another question. And so many people, we all fall into this trap because we all listen and we find ourselves preparing our reply and our response before people even finish talking. And that actually does go back to the brain's efficiency, by the way. My brain can process 10 times the information that you're capable of speaking at the speed. So my brain says, well, while I'm hearing what she says, I think I'll use this leftover capacity and I'll go over here and build my reply. And so we come, and so rather than going, wait a minute, wow, that's so intriguing, I have an opinion on that, but man, that's got to be subordinate to this question. I've got to ask this thing. And think about the innovation that begins to occur naturally and organically in a culture. Remember, culture: think, act, interact. If we create an environment where everyone says, hey, you have to think with the understanding that someone has something important to offer, you have to act in a way that you give that a platform, and you have to interact in a way where you are genuinely curious to extract every bit of that information out of that person that you can. With the understanding, guess what? A big portion of it's going to be worthless. Because we have to go through the worthless parts of it to get to the valuable parts. But So yes, I think it is insecurity in many leaders, but I also think it's this desire to, continue to contribute as leaders and to have value. Somewhere somebody told us, somewhere along the leadership journey, if it's to be, it's up to me, and I have to do this and I have to do that. So there's this expectation. Wouldn't it be cool if every leader led their organization with the intention to render themselves irrelevant?
Yes.
I wonder how good we would be then.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the whole proving, right, goes back to the idea if I'm completely secure and I know my value and I know what I contribute, then I don't care about my contribution because I can set myself aside. But it's interesting what you were talking about there is also there's a level of, I think as a leader, and I know we're going over time, but this is so good, Greg. So bear with me for a couple more minutes if you don't mind.
Oh, I
Um,
love
is there's a level of responsibility that leaders have and that is put on them, right? For the accomplishments, to the success, the metrics, the whatever it is. And I think some of it is that they're coming into the conversation saying, I have a responsibility to an outcome. And the interpretation of how they get to that outcome is, so I need to drive it. If it is to be, it's up to me, as opposed to recognizing that the responsibility, the ability to respond, the responsibility and the ownership is on pulling it out of the room, and that will create the best outcome. And so if there's that subtle shift in even in priority and focus going into the room, then I set aside my own, you know, need to say, oh, I need to make sure that I get this over the line to open it up. And actually, it creates the space for even greater results to happen far beyond what I could ever conjure up on my own. So,
You said that very well. I'm glad you're recording this. I'm going to have to go back and listen to that again. You articulated that perfectly, without question. Absolutely.
well, great minds think alike, and I just love how we kind of riff off of each other, and this conversation has been. This is one of those conversations that I'm going to go back to and listen to, and just the finer distinctions that you've shared on leadership and what it takes, and so I can look at myself and say, hey, where have I fallen into complacency or compliance or overcommitted? That's quite possible that I've been in that space a lot, and staying in that courageous. I know that you're in your book, you also talk about, you alluded to it here. I'm going to encourage our listeners to go get a copy of your book because you talk about the way that these, especially the three, there's the complacency. We don't really want to get stuck in complacency, but the other three dimensions, how they work together and integrate, and how you actually need all three at different times and for them to work together. And so we don't have time today to go into that, but it's all in your book. And
Yeah.
so I'm going to encourage everyone to go get a copy. It's on Amazon. It's also on Greg's website, and we'll make sure that's all in the show notes. GoCagle.com. And yeah, it is fantastic. And I've, as I said, I've already been recommending it to clients of mine who lead at the top levels to say, you've been working on culture, you want to, develop a more effective culture, then this is a book that you're going to want to read. And so I would encourage you to do that. Leaders of Transformation Take Action. So all of this is great, but it's when you actually start applying this, testing this out for yourself, with your team, with yourself, and ask yourself, what kind of culture have I established for myself? What kind of expectations have I given? What kind of boundaries and limitations have I put on my own thinking, on my family, on my, inner circle, right? And start there. Okay. And we'd love to hear your stories. Go on leadersoftransformation.com and you can reach out to us there. You, of course, can find us all on social. And like I said, we're going to have Greg's website and all his details in the show notes. You can go to GoCagle, which is GoCagle.com. Go directly to his website, get the information. That's my motive. I want to make sure that you get all the information that is going to help you to pull out, not to empower you, but to help pull out what's already there, and maybe give you the mental exercise, your brain that exercise to be able to expand beyond its current capacity. So we encourage you to do that. We'd love to hear your stories. And again, Greg, thank you so much for being here. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of the Leaders of Transformation.